Photography is all about light, right? So why go photograph animals at night? Well, you can always add light to a scene, and in any habitat, there's a complete different set of animals that are active at night to photograph. So don't be afraid of the dark. In this lesson, I'll explore things like using flash to light a beautiful frog, like this Wallace's flying frog. And things like how to refine your lighting technique to think about the background as well as the subject and creating some drama with shadows, like on this tarsier. Is action photography at night possible? It is, because you can use your flash, the short duration of your flash, to freeze your subject. So I'll tell you about how I photographed flying lemurs in the rainforest in Borneo. And also, you can mix ambient light with flash around dawn and dusk for various interesting effects, like these bats leaving their cave as it's getting dark. Rainforests are especially rich in nocturnal animals. And I actually did a whole story called The Night Shift in the Rainforest for National Geographic. So I'm going to use the pictures from that story and a few other shoots since then for the source material for this lesson. So let's start with this early photo of a praying mantis displaying that I took many years ago, on one of my first trips to the rainforest. And I used a setup that was basically similar to this one that I use now. 100mm lens, which is my favorite lens for macro photography, covers a really wide range of small to medium-sized subjects. I used a very basic lighting setup with just a single light held above the end of the lens, like you see here. A flash arm is really handy to have to be able to easily maneuver your flash and hold it to the camera. And of course, I had to trigger the flash. There are really two ways to do that. Right now I have a wireless transmitter on the camera that will trigger the flash when I take the picture. But also, you can use cables, like a cable running from the camera to the flash to trigger the flash. So you don't have to have the flash right on top, mounted on the hot shoe of the camera, because that does not give you enough flexibility to make interesting lighting in your macro photographs. So to get your lighting to be a little bit more interesting, what I like to do is to put my flash over on the side. And here you can see in this picture of the snake that the lighting is coming from the right side, creating these nice shadows and much more of a three-dimensional effect. The shadows are really important in macro photography. Really harsh shadows can be really distracting. And I want to demonstrate that with a little illustration here. So I'm going to use this light here on the table to show you that if I hold it above this lens cap, let's say this lens cap is my subject that I'm trying to photograph, the shadows behind this lens cap are really harsh, really sharp-edged right now, because this light source is smaller than the lens cap. I can use something called a softbox, which is a way to diffuse your light. And if I just put this on the light, hold it over the same lens cap, in roughly the same position, you see now the shadows are very soft. This is because the source light now is much bigger than the subject, so it fills in from around the subject and gives you nice soft shadows. So that's a really fundamental concept that you can use to really improve your macro lighting. So you can use different size, essentially softboxes, depending on the size of your subject. If your subject is really tiny, like this little leafhopper, which is just less than a centimeter long, the actual main flash itself is much bigger than that subject. So just having a single flash above that little insect is going to create a nice soft light. This essentially is a big softbox for such a small subject. If your subject is much bigger, you're going to want a bigger light source to get a soft lighting. So for example, here I'm photographing a frog on this tree, and you can see I'm using a setup where I've attached a second flash arm, because it's nice to have two lights to be able to have some balanced lighting from both sides, or maybe to have your main light, and the other side having a fill light on the other side, just like a portrait photographer might do in a studio. Here you can see that only one of my flashes fired in this picture, so the bottom one is not going off, only the top one is lit. But you can also note in this picture I have a little focusing light on top of my camera, this red flashlight right there mounted here to aim to help me focus. So with these two lights, I was able to get a nice shot of this frog with nice even lighting without harsh shadows. Now, how do you focus in the dark? Autofocus doesn't work so well when the light's low. If you have a bright focusing light, that you probably can use some autofocus somewhat, but what I like to do is once I get the focus roughly in the right area, I like to actually move myself in and out. So if this is my subject, instead of continuing to try to focus, we're talking about really fine amounts of movement that make a huge difference when you're shooting macro. So I get my framing and I get the focus roughly where I want it, and then I kind of rock my whole body in and out until I get the focus plane right on the eye of the frog, in this case. And I think that's a really useful trick for focusing in the dark. Be really conscious of your angles and your composition, because things like a frog, whether you're looking at them from under the chin or looking down on him from above slightly, makes a huge difference in what his expression looks like and also the overall kind of feel of the mood of the photograph. And also really pay attention to your backgrounds. This shot, I think I lit it pretty nicely, but I find this line of this leaf in the background to be really distracting. So that one wasn't as successful. I wasn't paying enough attention to my background. Here's one where I did a little bit better, and I got a really nice soft background. I was in tight. Your depth of field is going to have a huge effect on what your background looks like. So just like we were talking about with photographing the iguanas in the Galapagos, you can alter your f-stop in your macro shots to determine how soft or how much detail is going to show up in your backgrounds as well. So in this shot here, I got some really good balanced lighting with two soft boxes. I got some nice composition with these diagonal lines and these amazing colors and patterns on this frog's feet. Lead you up into his face with a cool expression. So everything really kind of came together in this shot, and in fact, it was used as the cover shot on the Geographic, the first cover that I ever had back in 2000, actually. But you don't always want to have sort of nice, uniform lighting around your subject. You don't have to even light from the front at all. You can have all your light coming from the back. Like I did with this caterpillar shot, feeding on the leaf. The caterpillar was carving this hole out of the leaf, and so I moved the flash way around the back so that I could just rim and backlight him. So with a small subject in a bracket like that, I could move it way around. So if my caterpillar was here, I could be lighting him just from the side like that. One way I also often work these days with these handy wireless transmitters is I can have one light on the front, kind of lighting the front of the subject, and I can use my left hand to move a strobe around and have side lighting or backlighting on the subject like that. So it's quite gives you quite a lot of flexibility. For example, here with this tarantula coming out of its web burrow, I wanted to keep the tarantula kind of dark and spooky looking, and I just lit up the web from the side to get this dramatic lighting. Side lighting can really add a lot of depth and drama to your macro shots. All right, I want to share with you a little case study in lighting about a tarsier encounter that I had. When I first found the tarsier, I was kind of excited, and I think I had the flash mounted right on top of my camera, and I took a quick shot with direct front lighting like this, which, as you can see, doesn't look that great. And then I realized the tarsier wasn't immediately going to leap away, and I had a few seconds. I started to think about my lighting a little bit more, move the flash off the camera to the side and down a little lower to create some shadows and a little bit of drama. And then I started thinking about the background. I want to get a light on the background. So I got a second light out. I got it pointed at the background, because you're out in the rainforest at night, but that doesn't mean you want all your backgrounds to be black. It's nice to show a sense of place that you're in this green forest. So got a light on the background, so it's getting a little bit better. And then I realized, okay, I can actually get in tighter on this guy. He was very cooperative. And so I moved in closer to try to illustrate his amazing fingers and his huge eyes. But I still felt like I wasn't quite capturing the mood of this amazing animal out there in the rainforest at night. I wanted a little bit more drama in the lighting. So I again worked with my strobe positioning to get more shadows on him. I wanted to accent these huge eyes. So that was getting a little better, but then I still had the black background, and I finally got my second light in place to light up the green background and achieve this final shot that I was really happy with, where you can really see the kind of key feature of this animal, his big eyes, really well. Got some shadows giving it that moody feeling, and a little nice green background as well. So all this complicated lighting, moving strobes around everything, is really hard to do by yourself, so it's really useful to have an assistant. In the case of this tarsier shoot, it was my young son who helped me out with the lighting. But it's really great to have somebody helping you out when you're trying to do something like that. Now I want to tell you about another case study of how I photographed a flying lemur, a strange gliding animal found in the Borneo rainforest. And the goal here was to get shots of this flying lemur actually gliding in flight between trees. They travel around at night, foraging on young leaves in the canopy. They're a very strange animal. They carry their young babies. You can see this female here has a little hairless baby hanging onto her chest. They hang upside down a lot of the time. And my challenge was, how was I going to get a shot of this animal as it leapt from a tree into the air, like you see here? Well, here's the plan that I came up with. I used a 300mm telephoto on my camera, and I used a camera with a fast motor drive. I used a flash on top of the camera like this with an attachment that concentrates the beam. This allows the flash to reach farther, without having to have a bigger, more powerful flash. And because I was shooting with a 300mm lens, I didn't need the flash to cover a wide area. So this very simple Fresnel lens attachment focuses the beam and gives me 2 or 3 stops more light at the subject. Okay, so I had this flash on my camera. I had a light similar to this one mounted beneath the lens where my left hand was, so that it would aim as a focusing light wherever I was pointing. And so I was able to focus. I was able to look through the camera. When the lemur was poised on a tree and looking around for the next place that was going to leap, that's when I would get ready. I would aim. I would focus on the lemur, and I would be ready to fire a burst when the lemur leapt off the tree. I wanted to have multiple chances, not just a single chance on a shot. I wanted my flash to go off multiple times. So there was one important thing I had to calculate in my exposure calculations. I wanted to use a short flash duration and shoot in manual mode. All right? The reason for that is, if I was shooting in automatic flash mode and the flash fired at full power, it would take a couple seconds to recharge, so I'd only get one shot. On the other hand, by shooting in manual mode, and I was working generally at about the same distance from the subject, so I was able to calculate this and test the shot ahead of time by taking some pictures of the tree trunk and getting my flash exposure correct. All right, so by shooting at a very short flash duration, like a quarter power or 1/8 power, that allows, then every time the flash fires, it only uses 1/8 of the power, so you can get a rapid burst. By shooting at this low flash power, when the lemur leapt off the tree, I could fire a whole burst of 4 or 5 shots, bam, 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 and the flash would go off each time, giving me multiple chances, and also to be able to chance to get a sequence like you see here. So the next frame revealed the little baby hanging onto the mother as she lifted up her wings. You see these amazing skin that stretches between the fingers all the way to the toes and to the tip of the tail in this animal. So I got a couple of shots like that of the lemur going perpendicular to me, but I really wanted to get a shot of more from beneath with the lemur gliding over me, and spent many, many nights out in the rainforest following these animals and trying to get shots. Got many unsatisfying shots like this, but finally I started to be able to interpret their behavior a little bit better. And so when the lemur was on a tree, I would see him looking around, trying to figure out where he's going to glide next, and then I would try to run in that direction and get ready and hope that he would fly toward me. Finally, I managed to capture this shot by not focusing on the tree where the lemur was, but focusing a couple meters in front of the tree, closer to me. So I was looking through the camera at a blurry lemur on the tree trunk, but then when the lemur leapt, I just tried to track it and fired a burst of shots, hoping that it's going to pass through the plane of focus. And that's how I managed to catch this lemur in flight. I do have a red-eye problem here. You are probably familiar with the red-eye concept when a flash reflects off the animal's or the person's retina, creating bright red eyes. But in this case, I didn't really have a way to deal with that. I needed to have my flash on the camera, so I decided that it looked pretty cool with glowing red eyes in this lemur. But red eye is something that doesn't always enhance your photos, even though it kind of worked here. When you have an owl with his wide open eyes, you can get a really serious red eye like I got in this shot. Again, here it looks kind of cool because it's his whole eye, but a lot of times if you get a red eye in a bird like this owl with a yellow iris and then the red pupil in the middle, it doesn't look very good, right? So how do you deal with that? How do you prevent that? Well, the best way to do that is to get your light source, your flash, further away from your lens. So the reason you're getting the red eye is because your light is coming parallel with the lens and it's reflecting right back into the lens. Whereas if you move it up above the camera far enough, then it won't reflect back into the lens. It'll reflect back below and you won't get the red eye. So I use a bracket like this, attach the flash on this, attach this bracket to my tripod or to the bottom of my lens foot so it'll aim wherever I'm pointing my lens. And that way, that's enough of a distance to prevent the red eye and get a shot of the same bird without red eye like that. All right, I want to now tell you about another case study about how I went about photographing flying frogs. Yes, there are frogs that can fly. Well, they don't actually fly, but they can glide using the huge webbed feet that you see on this harlequin tree frog here in Borneo. So this was part of a story I was doing about gliding animals in the rainforest. These frogs actually do leap into the air, and instead of having to go all the way down to the ground and up to the next tree, if they want to get from tree to tree, they can do a controlled glide with these huge webbed feet that they have. So how would I photograph something like this? I can't walk around the rainforest and just hope to see a flying frog gliding by and get a picture of it. That's never going to happen. So although my strong preference is to always photograph animals just as I find them in their natural position in the wild, occasionally with something like this, the only way to get a shot of this frog gliding was to catch the frog. So we went out and we found some place where some of these frogs were. We caught one. What I did was I used a device called a beam trigger, similar to an infrared beam that sets off an alarm system or something like that. You can position a beam of light that goes from a transmitter to a reflector, and when the subject breaks that beam, this device triggers your camera. Okay? So what I did was I positioned the beam sort of running up and down through the air here in front of this tree trunk. And then we released the frog over here onto a branch, let it leap off because we knew it would glide to the closest tree. And so it leapt and glided through the air toward this tree. And right when it broke the beam, it triggered my camera and flashes. And that's how I got this shot. So I experimented with closer and wider shots and tried to capture these amazing animals in flight. So with the equipment that's available these days, there are amazing, really cool things you can do with photography at night. Here's another shot of this Wallace's flying frog. I want to show you a few of the gliding shots here. So I was trying to shoot it from different angles. I tried shooting it from above. I tried shooting it from underneath. But really the most successful one was the one from the side because I was able to tell more of a story with this picture about why the frogs are gliding and coming down toward the ground. Here, in the background, you can see a muddy pool of water there in the forest, a big puddle actually created by pigs that were wallowing there, wild pigs. And that is actually the breeding site of these frogs. So that's why they're gliding down to gather around this pool and call, find mates, and then lay their eggs here so that their tadpoles can develop in these little pools. So this shot, I managed to get the frog gliding past the breeding pool, which really worked to tell the whole story. I want to show you one other gliding animal I photographed, which is a type of small gecko. Small nocturnal lizards, common in the rainforest. One cool thing about geckos, give you a little tip in case you ever have a chance to photograph any type of gecko. Unlike most other lizards, geckos don't have any eyelids, so they always use their tongue to clean their eyes off. So if you watch a gecko long enough, he's always going to lick his eyes. Like I captured that moment here, his tongue coming out. But what was special about this gecko was that he has flaps of skin between his toes and along his sides and along the sides of his tail that gives him more surface area, so he can also leap between trees and glide through the air. And so I used a similar technique with the frogs to capture this shot of the gecko gliding toward this small tree. But then I also wanted to try something a little bit different. I wanted to show like the stages of the landing of this gecko, how he was gliding through the air and then coming in for a landing. So this is actually the same gecko photographed with the flash firing twice during the same exposure. So that's a feature that most people don't realize is built into most of these modern flashes, is the stroboscopic flash feature, which you can use to set to flash multiple times in very rapid succession. So what I did was, while the shutter was open for like 1/8 of a second, while this lizard was leaping, I set the flash to fire twice, so that when he triggered the beam, the flash went off, boom, boom, and photographed him twice on the same frame. Well, let's talk now about some other techniques for subjects that aren't moving quite so fast. One kind of easy thing to photograph in the rainforest, but hard to find, are sleeping birds. If you go for a night walk in the forest and really have sharp eyes, you might find a beautiful bird like this garnet pitta in Borneo sleeping all curled up in a ball. And of course, then if you're very careful and don't disturb it, you can take your time, get your lighting organized, and get a nice shot. Like also here, a shot of this black-naped monarch flycatcher that I photographed in the forest in Borneo at night while I was sleeping. Using a strobe on my camera, but then I used a flashlight to illuminate the tree in the background to give it a better sense of where it was. And so actually this brings me to a topic I wanted to talk about, of doing night photography without flashes, but just using continuous lights, like a flashlight. There are actually some interesting advantages to doing it that way, like I did with this sleeping agamid lizard in Borneo. If your subject is not moving, then you can get a tripod positioned up close. You can use, a light like this. You can attach a softbox onto it. I like to use these bright LED lights. They have a focusing beam. And then I like to carry a second one and bring a little tripod or light stand like this that I can position as my second light, either aiming at the background or maybe backlighting the subject. And that way I can get some interesting lighting, and I can see exactly what my lighting is going to look like before I take the shot, which is quite a nice advantage. So for example, when we encountered this beautiful green python in the rainforest in Australia, it was in this hunting position, waiting for maybe a small rodent to run by this tree trunk on the ground here. And I didn't want to disturb it. And so first I used my big lens from a distance to get this shot with the flashlight on it, and tried to improve the lighting a bit, getting a second light going and getting a little more three-dimensional look to it. And then once I'd gotten that, I said, I really want to get in a little closer. So I started to crawl up toward the snake with my camera really low on a small tripod with a wide-angle lens. And then I had an assistant helping me position lights on the background. So I gradually, worked with the situation and said, okay, add a little light back over there, a little more light on the background, until finally we ended up with this shot, which gave me the best lighting I could achieve with nice lighting on the snake, as well as on the tree and on the foliage behind, giving us a nice sense of place. Here's one more example of a shot I took at night with continuous lights on an expedition where we were looking for new species in a mountain range in Australia. And when Conrad Hoskin, the herpetologist who was leading the expedition caught this lizard, which was a completely new species to science. You know, it was amazing to be there. And I also had a video cameraman that I was working jointly with. So he was actually really happy that I was able to shoot this all with continuous lights. And so he was recording this moment at the same time, and my flashes weren't going off, completely disrupting the video. So that's just another advantage if you can shoot video and stills at the same time if you're using continuous lighting. This lizard was so well camouflaged that when Conrad put it down on a rock, it practically disappeared. And I was trying to photograph it in a way that showed the camouflage, but also, you know, had the lizard standing out enough. So by having two of my flashlights with the soft boxes and adjusting the light very subtly, you can see here that by moving my light just a tiny bit, I got a little bit better lighting on the lizard and achieved the effect I want. So that's a nice way you can work with these continuous lights very subtly to perfect your lighting. Now here's a different kind of situation where you can use flash and combine it with ambient light. I photographed these bats in Thailand at the mouth of the cave when they emerged at dusk. And so, of course, I wanted the sunset to show up, so I set my background exposure for the sky. And then to get the bats to show up, they would have just been black shadows, right? So I used the flash to illuminate the bats as they came out. And so, of course, the flash is freezing the bats, but I still had a rather slow exposure, so you can see these kind of ghost-like shadows behind the bats. So one other thing to think about when you're doing this type of flash combining with ambient at slow shutter speeds is that, of course, the shutter speed is going to determine how much of that shadowy blur there is around your subject, whereas the flash is going to freeze your subject. Now, depending on how your camera is triggering the flash, it's going to determine whether that shadow is in front of the bat or behind. And you really want it to be behind. But the default way that your camera works is called first curtain sync, which means that the flash goes off when the first curtain of the shutter reaches the other side. That means as soon as the shutter opens, the flash goes off. And then if the shutter's open for a quarter second, you're going to get this blur. So the bat would be going past, flying past its frozen image, creating the shadow in front. That doesn't look good. So you need to go into your flash settings and choose a feature called second curtain sync, which means that the flash will go off right before the shutter closes. So you get the blur first, then you get the frozen image at the end of the exposure, right? Guess what? Then you get these nice shadows behind the bats. So second curtain sync, it's a useful thing to learn how to use. Here's another shot as it was getting a little bit darker that I took at that same cave mouth. Well, I hope this lesson is giving you some new ideas for night photography. Let's review some of the key concepts. It's all about the lighting. It's really important because you're controlling all the lighting in your night photography. Of course, like in all photography, composition and color really help this shot out. The diagonal lines and the expression, all those things are important as always. But you can really add a lot of drama with shadows. So pay attention to the shadows you're creating with your flashes and your backgrounds and whether or not you're lighting that. And try to highlight your subject's uniqueness and adaptations for the night. For example, the big eyes of this tarsier. And like in my flying lemur example, try to be creative and come up with technical solutions. There's a lot of technology out there that can help you create amazing images at night nowadays. So put the time in. You may fail a lot, but eventually it'll pay off and you'll get something amazing.